Hi everyone, my name is Nick, and today I'm going to talk about some houseplants that aren't green for the most part. So I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite colorful houseplants. This is the last video that I'm going to be posting in June, which is of course Pride Month, and I know I don't post the most groundbreaking content here on YouTube other than about indoor gardening, but I did just want to take a moment to remind everybody watching to never be homophobic or transphobic or anything remotely hateful to anybody for any reason ever. And if you would like to support anybody that is LGBTQ+, all you have to do is be an ally. So the first houseplant I'm going to talk about today that sports some wonderful color is one of my favorites. So this is my Aglaonema Red Emerald. I'm absolutely obsessed with the color on this foliage, and like I said, these are for the most part not green. These are plants after all, they do have to photosynthesize, so all the ones I'm talking about today do have green aspects to them, but it's the parts of them that aren't green that I'm so captivated by. And that's one of the main reasons why I really do love this Aglaonema. It's just something that you don't see very often, a houseplant that's this vibrantly red. It does have some really nice stems too. You can see how pink they are from the back. You can also see that I have had this plant for a couple of years now, and you can kind of see how Aglaonemas grow. So these two ones right here are actually like new pups that the plant's put off, which is very exciting. But you can see the main portion of the plant here, which is these 3 or 4, I think 3 canes that are kind of tied together that I have kind of like resting on the stick to hold them up a little bit, because as Aglaonemas do grow, they do get a little bit caney, but I kind of think that's part of the appeal about them. I think they kind of get some nice character once they get a little bit older. There are plenty of types of colorful Aglaonemas, or Chinese evergreen is their common name, out there. However, this red emerald is the one that I've just found the most luck with. There were a bunch of varieties that I've gotten in at the houseplant store back when I worked there, and I found some of them to not be the most favorable with the conditions that we had, but this is one that always just stood out amongst the rest to me for not only its looks, but for just being a straight up reliable houseplant. Aglaonemas are very, very low maintenance when it comes to light and watering. This is one that I keep next to my television on my little TV stand doodad thingy that I have with all those crates that I kind of piled up. And it's up against the wall, and it's really not receiving that much sunlight. It does get some morning sun, but besides that, it's kind of in the dark, and it really seems to like those conditions. And in terms of watering, I don't water this very often. This is in a rather large ceramic pot for the kind of plant that this is. So I don't find myself watering this probably more than like every 2 weeks or so, but it all depends on how dry your home is times, or how much light you're giving it as well, but it could dry out faster than that. And if it does get a little too dry, these plants are known to just kind of wilt a little bit, and they'll get a little flaccid, and then you go ahead and water it, and it perks back up to its nice self. I'm trying to avoid using another word there, but Aglaonema Red Emerald, really one of my favorites. There are plenty of other colorful Aglaonemas, like I said, but this is just my tried and true out of all of the rest. It is one that just really stands out to me, and this is a plant I will never be getting rid of. I am that much in love with it. This is probably in my top 10, top 15 houseplants that I own in my home or have in my collection. So let's move on to a little bit of a different color now. So let's talk about this one right here. So this is a really lovely Sansevieria, or Dracaena, depending on how diehard you are. So this is a Sansevieria Trifasciata Hahnii Gold, I want to say. I feel like I always get this name wrong. And I feel like last time I featured this plant, it probably was a little bit more full. It did lose a little bit of foliage, as when I moved, I decided to put it underneath my television where it's kind of like tucked into a shelf area. And that's just really not enough light for the Sansevieria. So it kind of told me that by dropping a few of its leaves, and I can see that this new growth is coming in a little bit thinner and not as happy looking. So after I'm done filming this video, I will just move this houseplant to perhaps underneath a grow light in this shelf or into one of my windowsills, but it's just telling me that it really does require a little bit more sunlight. And that's the thing about Sansevieria, is they really do require a little bit more light than we are told that they need. We're always told in houseplant stores that they are low light houseplants, which they can absolutely tolerate low light. You're just not going to get a lot of good growth out of them. And specifically this one that has such a vibrant color, it's really going to be hindered by low light situations. So if I really want this specific Sansevieria to look as if it's growing to its fullest potential, then I really am going to have to give it a little bit more light than some of the others that I have in my home. regardless of needing a little bit more light than we're told, they are very, very easygoing houseplants when it comes to watering, very similar to the Aglaonemas or Chinese evergreens. These really don't require water probably more than like every 2 weeks. If it isn't a very bright window, like I was saying, it might dry out a little bit faster. However, these seem to be very, very low maintenance, and if you are not watering these plants enough, they'll kind of just get a little bit puckered and look a little bit shriveled, and if it hasn't gone too far into that puckering or shriveling, it'll usually recover very easily. But if you do find one of your Sansevierias is heavily shriveled, if you do, get it on kind of a strict water regimen and, water it every time it's just dry, they'll usually come back, but it does take a little bit more time than, say, just a wilted Aglaonema or pothos after you water it and then it perks back up in like the next day's time. So you do have to be a little bit more persistent, but these are a little bit more difficult to get into that situation. So as long as you're watering your Sansevierias like at least every 2 or 3 weeks at the minimum, I'd say you're probably going to do just fine. But like I was saying, you really do need to give them a little bit more light than we are instructed to. So let's talk about this blue plant right here. Hopefully it shows up as how blue that I think it is. I mean, when I think of blue plants, I kind of think about like a Scindapsus or like a Cebu blue pothos. So they're not like blue like you would see in like a painting, but you know what I mean. This is kind of just like a planty blue. So hopefully this isn't too much of a cop out, but I absolutely love this houseplant. This is an incredibly underrated houseplant. This is a Premolina sinensis, and this is commonly referred to as an Asian violet. And like the name sounds, this is very closely related to African violets. These are also in the Gesneriaceae family, so they're commonly referred to as gesneriads. And gesneriads are commonly grown for their flowers. But I would say that pretty much all of the Asian violets that I'm aware of are grown for their foliage, which is very, very striking. They have some nice large leaves on some varieties, and some other ones have some really enigmatic foliage. But this is kind of a more run-of-the-mill, let's say, Primulina that you would probably run into in your houseplant stores. And I can guarantee you that these are types of plants that people just kind of like glaze over and don't really pay that much mind to. And they're making a mistake, because these houseplants are absolutely gorgeous. They really just have so much character. This is another one that I keep below my television in my little crate plant stand that I have going on. And I originally planned on putting in grow bars, like I have these LED grow bars that I just got from Amazon, inside the crate thing that I have to give it more light, but I don't really know if I want to do that. I haven't decided yet. I'm still like only like 85% there with my apartment, if I'm being honest, so it's still going to be a ways away before I share an official apartment tour. However, this plant's growing very, very well in that condition, not receiving too much extra light, so I think I kind of want to leave that shelf for like the lower light plants, and then I'll just move the ones that I've settled in there, like this Sansevieria, that require a little bit more light, to a higher light situation, and possibly I have something in here that can move out. We're getting kind of off topic, but you guys kind of get what I'm saying. These plants, Primolinas, they do bloom, and they have bloomed for me plenty of times. I forget if there is a specific time of year that these plants bloom, but their blooms aren't the most amazing thing. They are still beautiful by all means, but they're not as showy as like an African violet or some other gesneriads. However, that kind of makes sense, as these leaves are absolutely gorgeous and you can't have it all. There is a lot more to love about these plants than just their leaf patterns, though. I really do love the rosette shape that they grow in, very similar to like a Sansevieria. And also the leaves on many of them are incredibly fuzzy. You can see this just like layer of cilia that this plant has on the top of its leaf, and also the bottom and all over the petioles, but specifically on like the flat front of the leaf. They do a very good job at catching cat hair and dust and dirt and all of the above, so you definitely need to be a little bit more mindful if you want your houseplant looking perfect and not dirty at all. And kind of how this cilia translates as well, I guess, is that these leaves don't really care for getting wet. Specifically, cold water on the leaves is not going to be good, similar to all gesneriads, but you also don't want to get the leaves wet if it's sitting in the sun. According to my growers, it's totally okay if you get warm water on the leaves, so I'm either just super careful about watering these plants if I'm watering them with the watering can, or if I'm taking it to the sink, I feel comfortable if I'm using warm water that I can clean up the leaves a little bit. I just have to be sure not to let this plant sit out in the sun, but it's usually hanging out in the sink or the shower until it dries, so it's no problem at all for me. Let's talk about, before I move over to this area, I want to grab this one that's right behind me, because I didn't want to move it out of my background for today's video, but I do absolutely want to talk about it. So this is my Piperornatum, or Piper crocatum, whatever you want to call it. And this is another one of my favorite houseplants. This is one that I don't believe it's on the market yet, but I feel confident because this houseplant is so beautiful. Give it a year or two and I'm sure it's going to be popping up in your local houseplant stores. Like I said, if it's not already, I don't work in the industry anymore, so I don't know how things are going, but the leaves are just so beautiful on this. They do have a really, really dark shade of green that can be almost near black on some of the leaves, but it has this just really striking marbled pink color. And not only that, if I flip it around to the back, it has this really stunning kind of wine red color, almost burgundy. It's really, really stunning. There is just a lot going on with this plant in terms of color. There is a very interesting attribute that this Piper in specific does have, that it has all these crystals all over the leaves. So I could imagine somebody who's new to indoor gardening thinking that this is covered in spider mites or something, but you can see in the back of the leaves it has all these clear and black crystals all over. It's kind of funky. I don't really know all the science behind it, but it does make the plant look really dirty, but I usually just kind of leave them there, as I don't know, it doesn't really bother me at all, but just something to point out in case somebody else is growing this at home and they're kind of confused about what's going on with their plant. But it's just a bunch of sugar crystals on the back of the leaves, none to worry about. I've grown a bunch of different Pipers in my home, and I've only found success with a couple of them, but fortunately this is the one I found the most success with. It is surprising to me because this is also definitely the most gorgeous Piper I've ever grown in my home, and if it's anything reminiscent of a Calathea or a Stromanthe, sometimes the most beautiful houseplants tend to be the most difficult ones to grow. For every other Piper I've grown, I've had to grow it inside a glass cloche. There's another one struggling that's sitting behind me here. I don't know how well you can see it, but this is the one that's really just my pride and joy right now, and it started as just a couple of leaves. I got it as a cutting from one of my friends, and it dropped a couple leaves while I was propagating it, and then out of nowhere it perked back up and started growing. I attempted to propagate it again last year, which completely failed, which is kind of sad, but in return it put off this long vine right here, so I'm not really mad about it because it turned my plant from being just one long spindly vine into two less spindly vines, so I'm really happy about it. And you can see pretty clearly that this is the new vine right here for how much more vibrant this growth is in comparison to this one. But I can happily report that this has been a very, very easygoing plant for me. It is a little bit needier when it comes to watering. It's one that I probably give it water every 3 or 4 days, but because it's so gorgeous and just a beacon of energy sitting on my shelf here, I don't seem to ever forget about it. And if I do forget about it, it does just wilt a little bit and it perks up very, very quickly. This is one I could just imagine doesn't ship very well if you were to buy this online. From the way that I attempted and failed at propagating it last year, I can just say I can imagine this is just not going to handle being in a box wrapped up for any amount of time. So I am lucky that I did get this as a very strong cutting to begin with, but nonetheless, I could ramble about this houseplant because I'm absolutely obsessed with it, but that's for good reason. It's absolutely gorgeous, and a houseplant that I would recommend once it becomes more available, or probably the price drops. I'm assuming this probably doesn't go for a cheap price tag. I don't really know for certain, but it's so great. Just make sure that you're not buying a cutting of it online because that thing will be dead before it even gets to your door. I have 2 more to talk about today, so I'm talking about 6 total. So let's discuss this lovely little guy right here. So this is a Hoya Obscura. This is an excellent example of a Hoya that accepts sun stressing very, very well. So you can see how these leaves have this kind of red, yellow, green, weird, splotchy pattern to them. And that is simply because this plant has just been sitting in a very bright window for a decent amount of time now. And not all Hoyas, maybe even Hoya Obscuras, are going to accept sun stress this easily. I have put another Hoya Obscura that I had in a south-facing window in my old home, expecting it to turn a very nice shade of red, and a couple of the leaves got absolutely fried. So maybe you do need to ease it into those situations, but this is just one that I've kind of eased in from having it in a west window. Now it's in my east-facing window because that's all I have in this apartment, but as I do live on a higher up floor and I don't have very much obstruction. I'm almost worried with some of my houseplants, specifically my aroids, that this east facing light is getting to be a little too intense now that we're in like the dead center of the summer, or at least the days are the longest as they could be right now. Getting a little off topic, but this Hoya I did receive as just a plain green Hoya Obscura from my friend Autumn right before quarantine, right before the whole coronavirus thing kind of hit the fan. So this is kind of my relic from back what times used to be, let's say. But I don't really have too much entirely to say about this because obviously it hasn't really grown that much. I do have another Hoya Obscura, like I said, that's grown a little bit more for me, but unfortunately doesn't sport this beautiful red sunstress that many people grow Hoyas like Hoya Obscura and Hoya Sunrise for. As this is a Hoya, I do just need to be mindful not to give it too much water, which really isn't an issue for this specific one because it's in such a teeny tiny terracotta pot with a very porous soil mixture that is full of perlite and orchid bark. So this thing does dry out very quickly, and I probably need to think about this more than I do. But once again, as it is a Hoya, it just accepts neglect very, very well. The worst thing you can do to your Hoyas is give it too little light and too much water, and I am doing the exact opposite of that. So that's probably kind of helping out a little bit in how sun-stressed this Hoya is getting, but I'm looking forward to it growing a little bit more and becoming a little bit more robust as I can accept these 5 leaves for what they are right now. But it has been a year and a half, so I'm expecting a little bit more of this guy, but like I said, maybe I just need to pay this a little bit more mind before it gives me that back. So the last one I want to talk about today is, oh, this one's kind of getting a little wild, but this is my Ceropegia woodii Variegata. I feel like there's a longer name for that I usually say, but that's what I'm going to say today. And this is actually just a very, very long version. I have all this growth right here, but this growth right here is getting very tired. It doesn't seem to be loving the transition from my old apartment to this apartment, which, like I said, the sun is still very good here, but I don't know. This old growth is starting to look a little tired. It looks totally fine, but just in comparison to this new growth right here, you can see how this stuff right here is looking a little bit tired. And I am feeling a little tempted to just chop this thing like all around here. There is, look at this tuber, but look how much is going on in here where I feel very confident with like all these tubers and all these little new growths coming out that if I cut this all the way back and of course propagated everything that I could from this, that I would have a nice full specimen in no time, as I've seen what this plant can do in the amount of time that I've had it. Also, it has all of these tubers along the stem here, which if I did take these, cut them off and put them in water, those would be the easiest parts to root of the plant and also where growth would be more encouraged to come out of. But you can see it is really, really long. The one thing about this though is as it does kind of revert over time, you can see that some of these longest vines, maybe you can, I don't know how well you can see, but some of the longest vines are plain green, and as this plant does grow more and more of the plant tends to revert, and those kind of start to outweigh some of the variegated pieces. So that's another reason why I'm kind of considering cutting this back and almost starting over in a way and just propagating all of the variegated stuff together and propagating all of the non-variegated stuff together. I think you guys get what I'm saying. But that's a little hard to do because I'm a little sentimental with this plant as I have had it for a couple of years. I think this is a plant that I ordered online like right when I started working at the houseplant store a couple of years ago as kind of a gift to myself for getting a new job. But it's been a long time since then, but I'm just really, really falling head over heels for this new growth that's just starting to spill up the side of the pot here. It's so cute. So I feel like I'm just feeling a little bit tempted for that, but can you blame me? But this is a ridiculously easy houseplant to grow. Unfortunately, I feel like it still carries a little bit more of a price tag. I'm sure that price tag has come down a little bit in the recent time. I'm hoping, I'm not really positive. Like I said, I don't work in the industry anymore, so I've kind of a less of a grasp on that. But back when I worked in the industry, I wasn't surprised to find us at the houseplant store, plenty of other people selling little 2-inch pots for like $20, $30, and anything in a hanging basket would probably be over $60 at least from what I've seen. But this is one that you can be rest assured if you do get your hands on just like a cutting or two, that in honestly not that long amount of time you will have a really nice full plant. I got this as probably like 4 or 5 little just like pieces that were probably propagated by the seller and put in a pot, and I've grown it out to be this monster of a plant ever since. If anybody tells you that this plant is ridiculously slow growing, they probably just have not had it for that long. But like any other Ceropegia, it really seems to just kind of get ahead of itself once it gets really acclimated to your home, which is very enjoyable because, like I said, you can just start up with one little strand and before you know it, you'll have a really nice full plant or really long waterfall of plant. Ceropegia across the board, at least all the ones that I've grown, tend to be very drought tolerant, which makes a lot of sense because they're very succulent houseplants, and they also sport all of these tubers that form along the stems and also inside the soil that are storing a lot of water and energy. So it's a very, very easy houseplant to grow. Definitely great for beginners. I know sometimes the price tag can scare you off, but there really is no reason to pay the extra money to get the variegated if you're just about the leaf shape, because the plain non-variegated one I think gets the job done just as well, and it will turn a little bit pink when it gets stressed out from the sun. That's why mine is so pink to begin with in comparison to some of these whiter ones that are forming since I moved to this apartment, because it's probably not receiving as much sunlight as it was in the old place with those south-facing windows. So just kind of an example there. But like I said, if it's all about the leaf shape, it really doesn't matter what kind you're getting. I wouldn't spend the extra money. But if you are head over heels for this variegated pink, I totally understand, as you know, I bought the plant too, so I'm not one to say anything. But that's gonna do it for today's video. Plants that aren't green, colorful houseplants, my favorite colorful houseplants, whatever I call it. There are a ton of colorful houseplants. I really just kind of honed in on some of my favorites today, but of course I could talk about more another time. But thank you guys so much for joining me. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at Philly Foliage, subscribe to my channel, don't be homophobic, transphobic, or anything ever, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Have a great day.